All right. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Sorry for that. I've never, somehow we messed around with the intro scene. So that's why you saw that like countdown. I've never done that before. So yeah, it's pretty cool with the music and all. So yeah, we're live. Hello, everyone. Really excited to get the show started. Really excited about today's show in particular because this is the first time we're having somebody who was a teacher and made the transition into project management, right? So I'm really excited to welcome Melissa Magee to the show. Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here and excited to share all of the things that I experienced. I know it can be really hard to think about a lot of these things. So excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to have you here. So, Melissa, just quickly, for those that don't know who you are, why don't you just quickly introduce yourself?
My name's Melissa Magee. I currently work as a project and portfolio manager at a freeze-dried fruit company, so work in food and beverage. But a couple years ago is when I really made my transition from, I was a middle school Spanish teacher, had taught for 4 or 5 years in the classroom, and then transitioned from that into project management at an HR tech and consulting company. So pivoted the industries as well. And before that, I worked in international nonprofit, lived in Guatemala for a few years as a country director for a nonprofit, worked in California in another nonprofit. So I've kind of had the range of several different roles within nonprofit education and then kind of switching into the corporate scene in the last few years.
Nice. So before you were a teacher, you were working in the nonprofit space, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
So can you, because I want to start with your career life, so to speak, before you were a project manager. So what was that like? What was the non-for-profit sector like? And after that, we can move to the education space.
Yeah. So, living and working, I worked as a substitute teacher. I got my education and my master's degree for teaching right out of college. And so spent several years kind of hopping around doing different things with my husband at the time. And so that's why we spent some time overseas, spent some time in Guatemala, Rwanda. And so in that space was really focused on international nonprofit work, relief and development work. And so managing teams, managing groups of people working on local projects. So that was what I did for a few years also while I was having my 3 daughters and being able to do some part-time stay at home. And then, when we came back from Guatemala is really when I dove into teaching and I'd already had my teaching license, like I said. And so finally got to be in my own classroom and taught full-time for 4 years. And, that was when COVID happened. And so teaching during COVID, as we all remember and know, whether we were parents or new teachers that were teaching, it was a really rough time. And so I just got to the point where it was very hard for me to balance my own classroom and my work balance with what was required of me as a teacher to be able to do my job and the number of hours and the amount of time it took for me I was teaching at sometimes 3 or 4 different classes. And so the prep work involved, plus I was teaching in Spanish. And so having to create materials from scratch in Spanish was just so much work. And it just was very draining. I would come home from work and just have hours of work still to do and also take care of my children. So it got to the point where I just thought, this is not sustainable for me long-term. I'm not enjoying this. I just could tell that I wasn't thriving. And so I literally Googled one day, what can teachers do outside the classroom? Because I just had no idea, honestly. And what first started showing up in my algorithm once I Googled that were things like copywriting. I thought, I like to write. I can do that, maybe something on the side. Right. But that didn't really quite resonate. And so I kept just digging and digging. And then a friend recommended a couple of teacher transition podcasts, which were the game changer for me, because during these different podcast interviews, I was able to see the range of roles that teachers could pivot to outside of the classroom. I just had no idea. And so that's where I really first discovered what is project management. I heard an interview with a project manager, and she talked about all of the skills that she was using from teaching And it just resonated so deeply because it was all the things I liked about teaching, being organized and tracking things and getting things done and helping things move forward and working with teams and leadership and all of those things. And so I thought, wow, that sounds like something I'd like to do. I took one of those online quizzes, like what should you do as a teacher? And project management popped up. And so I really just dug in and started looking at how could I make that transition. So that's sort of how I got there.
Nice. So I want to double click on something. So let me take a step back. I have a lot of teachers reaching out to me. And I think one of the things that I see a lot is that many of them burn out, right? I don't, if you're not comfortable sharing, that's fine. But yeah, would you say that this is something, because I guess my evidence is anecdotal, but would you say that this is something that's quite rampant in that sector?
Yes. So I never could shut my brain off from work. It was always, as soon as I get home, make my kids dinner, and then I need to go grade papers for another 3 hours, or I need to think about the lesson plans that I didn't finish for tomorrow, or Saturday morning, it was a lot of should. I should be grading papers. I should be catching up. There just is not enough time in a school day. Teachers are given, maybe a 30 to 45 minute prep period most of the time to grade, plan, respond to parent emails, do all of these things that are on time. There are so many expectations for teachers. I didn't know a teacher who left when our contract day ended. Like you could not function and do that job in the constraints that they gave. And that's just expected, right? And that can be true in the corporate world too, right? There might be we say it's a 40-hour work week. A lot of people may work 50 to 60, but with teaching it, there's just a different level of expectation. And you literally can't put things off, right? Because you have students every day. Like I can't put off my lesson plan for tomorrow because I will have 30 humans in my classroom. So the pressure, the time constraints, and then just the sheer exhaustion. When I finally left the classroom, my daughter said to me within 2 weeks, "Mom, you seem so much less stressed than you used to be." And it's because I was exhausted all the time. I didn't have that ability to shut my brain off. Now, I'm not saying I don't have stress. I can be really, on deadlines and working. But when it's time for me to close my computer at the end of the day, I can shut my computer, turn off my work brain, go hang out with my kids, make dinner, do all the busy things I have to do. But I'm not in the back of my mind thinking I really need to be working on lesson plans. So,
Melissa, would you say you burnt out while you're a teacher or no?
Of course. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think that's the biggest reason teachers, people who, went into education straight from college, right? They don't know anything else. And so a lot of teachers, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so they sort of assume this is how jobs function in the world, right? I went from college into teaching, and teaching is really draining and all of these things. And you don't know that actually there's a way to have jobs and work-life balance outside of the classroom that exists. A lot of people talk about, well, teachers get summers off, which they don't get summers off. They don't get paid for summers. So they have a 10-month contract, right? But the amount of decompressing that happens during the summer, the first 3 weeks of summer, you're so physically, emotionally, and mentally drained that you're just often like a bump on a log, and you're just sitting there decompressing. And then not to mention the expectations of paying for maintaining your license or your PDUs or, if you want any hope for any kind of increase in a salary, you have to be working on the next level of, education. And so it's pretty rare that a teacher's not working in the summer, or in my case, and a lot of other teachers, working a second job during the summer. I would pour wine at a winery. I worked at a gym as a manager to supplement my income. So on top of the job itself being exhausting, I also wasn't paid a wage that made it so I could do that job alone. So I often had to have another job as well. So.
Wow. Well, that's really, that's really sad. And I've heard many similar stories, people reaching out, they want to transition to project manager. And the reason why I'm spending time here is also because in the project management field, like burnout is also something that's quite prevalent. And so I would like to get your take on that. But just before we go there, so I just did a poll recently of what are the top invisible struggles of project managers, and burnout was by far the number one. Like there was burnout, there was loneliness, and also there was a study that was done on LinkedIn. I don't know if you saw this, but out of all the professions out there, project management sort of ranked at the top when it comes to burnout, right? So the reason I just want to spend some time here is teaching is also that profession as well, that where there's a lot of burnout, and you've experienced burnout. So I wonder if that puts you in a particularly advantageous position to deal with burnout as a project manager, to maybe even see it from afar, so that okay, these are my boundaries. This is the kind of job I want. I don't want a job that's gonna, So does that make sense? So because you sort of experienced it somewhere else, like, so how do you navigate and how do you deal with that now that you're a project manager?
That's a really great call out. Project managers, I think one of the reasons it can be so draining and why project managers burn out is because of that similar to teaching thing that's going on, which is you're constantly thinking about it, right? You're constantly thinking about this deadline and this dependency, and I need to follow up with this person. And so part of it is that kind of organization and that constantly thinking about all the inner workings, right? Like a lot of people, the joke about, project managers are just professional naggers, or, we just take really great meeting notes. But, it's so much more than that. And there's so much that we're thinking through. I hadn't thought of it this way, but I think what you just said makes a lot of sense to me because I have the experience as a teacher managing that burnout. Maybe I do have a higher threshold for that burnout, or maybe I'm able to kind of draw that line a little bit more. I do think the difference still is I get to end my day and stop, where with teaching that just never turned off. So within project management, and I'm not saying that there are definitely probably times when you're thinking about work at night. I'm not saying that, but I do think that's the difference for me personally between burnout with teaching and burnout with project management is I am burned out and really tired during my work day. And I'm able to separate it a little bit in the evening and the weekends where I just didn't have that as a teacher.
Right. And maybe that's also something that's very important for, as a lesson for us, PMs. It's, maybe that's something to sort of try to judge before you get into a role. Like what's work-life balance going to be like? Like, are you going to, when you close for the day, are you really off, or are you, going to be on the clock, right? Because I know I've had jobs where it's like I'm working with teams across the entire world, and and you're sort of like the linchpin, so you have to always be on there. You don't really have hours, and I know, like I burnt out, right? So maybe that's one thing that we should look out for.
Agreed.
Sorry, go on, Melissa.
Well, and you and I, before we started here, we're talking about, right, my morning started at 7 a.m. because I was on a call with some, a global team in China and the UK and France, because that is the reality of the time and place we're in, right? That it is hard to, like, most of us don't have just a typical 9 to 5. So saying that to acknowledge that it isn't as easy as like, oh, I always just shut my computer at the end of the day. But I do feel like there is a level where in the industry that I'm in, and that also is part of it, it can depend on the industry, because in my previous industry in HR tech, there were deadlines and you sometimes did have to work late at night because people had to get paid, right? In the industry I'm in now, I'm able to do that where I can just at 5 or 6 o'clock at night or whenever I'm done. Yes, there are things that are burning, but no one else, is thinking about those things at that time. So it'll have to wait till the next morning. But that doesn't mean that the moment I hit the ground running that I'm not going all day. Frankly, my day, I often have to catch myself like, oh, I should probably stop and eat lunch, so my days are very, very busy. And so I do think it's important to call that out. I think the burnout can also happen industry to industry. So I think to your point, when you're thinking about project management, thinking about those during the interview process, Some of that is company culture, right? You have some company cultures where you're going to get emails from your C-level or your supervisors all hours of the day and night. And that often sends the message that the expectation is that you're also working and on call during all of the hours of day and night. If you're working for a company where, the upper level executive leadership is not sending those emails outside of those basic hours, then that also sends a kind of a company culture that it's okay to wait until tomorrow to respond to that email.
Right. Melissa, when you're, I know right now you're not interviewing, but when you're interviewing, is that something that you try to sniff out, like, try to sort of understand what the work-life balance will be? Is that something that you try to source out?
Absolutely. Especially because of my experience as a teacher, that's something that is a high priority for me. Now, that's a hard thing to be honest, that's a hard thing to really sniff out in an interview, but you can ask questions that get around that, or just to ask about, what are expectations around responding to emails in a timely manner, or what are expectations around things like taking PTO, right? Like I've had bosses who say, please take your PTO, and they mean it, and they really want you to take time. And they model when they take PTO, they also take the PTO, don't respond to emails during that time, versus those people that are on vacation, but checking emails and sending emails every day while they're sitting at the beach because they have to be involved. So those types of things, if you can kind of understand, that work culture will give you a lot of indication on the type of culture that's expected.
Right. No, that's a really great point. So for me, I know when I'm off, I still, check emails, and that's something that maybe it's because of the stage of, that we're at as a company, but I normally try to encourage my team, like when they're off, that they should be off, right? So it's kind of like do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, no, that's a good point. To be able to model that as well. I want to go back to you've left teaching. Now you want to transition into project management. So how did that? So you've decided, okay, project management is where you want to go. Now, can you walk us through how that happened? Like, what are some of the things that you did, translating experience? I think you took the PMP before you became a project manager, right?
Sort of. So yeah. So I started, looking into, like I said, project management, figured out pretty quickly, okay, this is what I want to do. And so then, of course, the next step was, how do I get there? And so again, I joined different project management communities on LinkedIn, started immediately connecting with project managers on LinkedIn. As you know, there are just so many helpful people out there, especially now, even compared to a couple of years ago, that help with people transitioning. There are so many good free resources that didn't exist even a few years ago. But so I started looking into that. And so the first thing I did was I took the Google course through Coursera, just kind of basic project management 101. The reason I did that one was because I also wanted the 35 hours so that I could apply for my PMP. I made the decision. I got to the point where I looked at what is the PMP, and at first thought, okay, well, I don't have the experience that's required, right? And then as I dug into it, I realized, actually, it was during the Google course, there was a moment when one of the teachers in that course said, here's an example of a project manager. A teacher is a project manager. And it was just like the light bulb went on. Like, even in their course, they were using teachers as an example of a project manager because of the skills that teachers have, and, the definition of a project being, clear start and end date, providing value, all of those things, the 5 stages of a project that a teacher experiences every school year. It feels so natural for a teacher. I just didn't know the language to use. And so as I was experiencing and learning what is project management, it was just so it felt so obvious to me, like, yeah, this is what we do, right? And so it was just helpful to get the language. And so I had my eyes set on the PMP.
Sorry to interrupt, Melissa.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you walk us through how teaching is like project management, just for those of us that are, on the outside?
Absolutely. Great question. So again, if I'm going to say the definition of a project has a clear start and end date, provides value, and has structure, let's take a 10-month school year. And you take the 5 phases of a project. So you have initiating and planning, right? So you're starting the year, you're planning out the year, you're maybe making, you can use the work breakdown structure model of, I'm going to teach social studies. I'm going to teach an 8-week unit on the American Revolution. Then I'm going to break those down into subtasks and sub milestones, and the same exact thing that we do when we're creating a project plan is what teachers are doing when they're creating lessons. I have to make sure that I'm meeting the learning objectives. I have to make sure that my lessons match the state standards that are required. I'm in the state of Oregon, that I'm teaching to the standards. And so that's part of a project like a project, right? You're making sure that you're in the scope, your scope management and all of those things, right? And so all of those pieces feel like the initiating, planning, and then, during the school year, you're executing, you're monitoring and controlling and constantly changing based on student feedback. Oh, this lesson didn't work very well. I need to tweak this. Oh, I need to adjust this timeline, but that means I need to adjust this. All of those things are what teachers are doing, but we're talking in micro decisions. They talk about teachers having to make, I forget the number, like hundreds of micro decisions in a day, because you're constantly context switching and thinking about this decision versus this decision. And project managers do the exact same thing constantly throughout the day, like pivoting from this context to this context. So that's the execution, monitor and control right throughout the year, making sure you're staying on task, staying on the timeline, making sure you're going to meet the objectives before the school year is over for, state testing or whatever that is. And then, of course, closing it out, making sure at the end of the year that you've wrapped everything up well, and that you're probably preparing, if you're going to teach the same content the next year, that you've updated those resources and closed things out. And so to me, it's just a very clear start and date, 5 phases of the project.
Wow, I didn't quite realize how, it is basically a project. I didn't quite realize it until you just laid it out like that. So who are the stakeholders?
Great question. Obviously the students are a big part of that. The students are who you're teaching to, but I'm also, managing expectations of the principal and the administration. Mm-hmm. Parents are key stakeholders. That's who I'm doing a lot of my communication with, right? Mm-hmm. My colleagues, if I'm planning, lessons or working alongside other, like I taught Spanish language arts, so working with the other language arts teachers, making sure we're all in communication. So several different types of stakeholders there.
Right. Amazing. And you deal with each one of them differently, parents, students.
Exactly. Different communication. I could be wanting to communicate, there is a test on Friday, please study, and the communication that I will give to a parent versus the students in my class, mm-hmm. and the type of communication, the way I communicate it, maybe speaking it and writing it and sending an email. Those are all things that project managers do. Like, how do I not just send another email that reminds someone of a task? How do I use my emotional intelligence to help people where this student really works well when I have a one-on-one and say, hey, you're stuck here. What can I do? Where this student you send them a checklist, remind them, and they're like, yep, I'm on it, right? The same thing happens with project management. Like, you get to know your team and you figure out this person responds really well with direct information. This person, you need to pick up a phone and actually call them and talk to them. And so that emotional intelligence, as a teacher, at the minimum 30 students, I had 150 students because I taught 7 periods a day. You're having to manage the emotional intelligence of different levels of students all day. And so you learn quickly to pivot from how you give those messages depending on the receiver of the information. And that's what project managers do all day.
Oh my God, 100! That must be exhausting. Especially if you want to do a good job. You're like, I want to touch the life of every single student. Being able to deal with that, that must be really draining emotionally and psychologically.
You got it. It is. It really is.
Right. So Melissa, there was a question I was going to ask that just skipped me. Okay. So in the school year, what's the outcome? What would you say is success? because I imagine success is not just finishing. Like, what's the success criteria?
That's a great question. You know, something that was required as a teacher for me is that I would have to put up on my board every day, what is the learning objective of the day? So students knew, what are we focused on? If a principal or administrator came to observe a teacher's class, which is part of teaching, is you were observed. Not a lot of other professions do you have your supervisor directly observe you like that, but that happens. So they come in, they observe you, they ask the students questions like, what are you learning today? And what's the objective? And do you know why the teacher is talking about this today? Like, that happens while you're teaching. And so you have the objective up on the board, and you make sure that students understand, like, the reason we're doing this today is X, right? That's the number one question. If anyone with kids knows, why do we have to learn this today? Why are we doing this? I mean, that's the most common question, right? Like, will I ever use this again in my life? And so making sure that you're helping students see the tasks that the teacher is asking them to do and how those align with the learning objectives is, again, similar to project management, where, hey, I need you to perform X, Y, and Z because these things are dependent on that. And so this is why I need these things to happen, right? Just helping people understand how what they're doing affects the bigger picture. And to answer your question, it's meeting the learning objectives. Like I said, there are state standards that by law teachers are required to teach and test on. So it's making sure you're tracking, have I hit these standards? And so by the end of the year, you're really looking at that. Have I met those standards? Have I, created an atmosphere of learning for students? Have I been able to, help those students? We don't really fail students anymore like we used to. It used to be you could get held back if you failed the class. So it's not about even just passing students, but it's about, was there content that was learned? Do they have skills now that they didn't have at the beginning of the year that will make them better students and better humans as they progress to the next grade?
Okay, so we don't fail students anymore?
Say that again?
We don't fail students anymore, so students don't fail?
Not in the state of Oregon. I don't know. I mean, every state is very different, but we don't. We often just pass them along, and then they. Okay. I mean, it's an unfortunate part of education. It's. Here's what I'll say. One of the criticisms I get or pushbacks I get as a former teacher and someone who does actually help other teachers move out of teaching, whether it's into project management or something else. One of the big pushbacks is, well, we need teachers. Why would you encourage teachers to leave the classroom? Don't you care about our kids, right? All of these questions. Like, look, I have 5 kids right now that are in the education system. I want the education system to work and work well. It is not on the teachers to fix the issue. And it's frankly a bit of a guilt trip to tell a teacher that don't you care about the kids? Of course they care about the kids. That's why they're there. But also, like, they cannot do what the job is expecting if they're so burnt out and so strapped for resources that they can't function. I've heard stories from teachers where they had mental breakdowns and they had to go on antidepressants, and they've had physical like situations where they were hospitalized because of the stress and all of that. And that is not on teachers. That should not be their responsibility, because don't you care about the kids, right? So yes, I want the education to be fixed and to work. And I want my own students to have teachers who want to be there, who are physically and mentally able to be there and give what they need to do for the students. And that's just not the story for everyone. And so if there is a teacher who feels like they just can't do it anymore and they need to get out, please don't give the teacher that grief or ask them those questions of like, don't you care? They don't need teacher guilt. They need support, and do what you need to do.
Right. No. I mean, that's so. I think the way you stated that was so powerful, because I mean, I can only imagine what the teachers are going through, because first of all, it's not like it's a really high paying job. So they went in there because of the love of the profession, to want to impart knowledge. And then, when they're doing that, like, there's also the guilt of, okay, I'm not even really performing as I should because of all these other things that I need to do, other than teaching, right? And then, you're dealing with that, and then there's a thing, okay, should I now prioritize my health? Because now you need to make a choice, right? Like I love this profession, but yeah, I'm burning out and I might kill myself, right? So there's that, and then there's now, when you make the decision to go, like I don't think the guilt goes away, right? So it's just really
It doesn't. Yeah.
I can only I mean, I've never been in that situation, but I can only
Yeah.
imagine what that must be like. No,
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to say something? Did I?
No, I was just going to say, I still think about my students. I still pass my former students. I mean, I still live in town where I taught. I see my former students all the time. And it was interesting when I did finally decide to leave teaching, and I actually left mid-school year, which is another, piece of it. Not everyone can do that. I broke my contract and worked with my union to make sure that was going to work. But my students, I taught middle school students. My students were so supportive. The parents were very supportive. They understood that like I wanted to be home for my own kids. And frankly, it was like I got a lot of support from it. Like people understood that what I was being asked to do was a lot. And, if that's the decision a teacher needs to make, like what they need is support, and just like you need to do what's best for you. So.
Before we move on from this topic, because like you have kids in the system, I have kids in the system. So is this might be a big question, but is there hope?
I want there to be hope. If I'm being very honest, I want there to be hope. I'm a big believer in public education. I specifically chose to teach in public schools. I also know it's a privilege to be able to choose where we send our kids. Even I'm dealing with this right now with my own daughter. We chose to send her to a different school this year than where we live. And I know that that's a privilege and an opportunity that I have. And so I really struggled with that as a parent, because I see sometimes the failings of certain districts over others. And a lot of that, it frankly comes down to money. I know we have tons of budget cuts. My daughter's playing soccer and they don't even have enough money to send them on the bus to their soccer games. And so they're having to raise money to get to their soccer games. And so the money piece is just so big. And for me, there is enough money in this world to fix a lot of the problems. It's not just about money, but that would be a good start, to be totally honest. But we choose to spend a lot of money in this country and in these advanced industrialized countries. We choose where we spend our money. And, during COVID, there was this hope. Okay, people finally understand, there was call to get back to school, and we need teachers. Teachers are so important. Like all the parents who were stuck at home homeschooling their kids were like, oh, this is harder than I thought, right? And so that was the one time I think teachers felt hope, like, oh, maybe finally we are going to get the support that we need. And then what happened instead is that everyone forgot. We got back into the system, and not only did we forget, we started pulling more resources. And that's really where a lot of the issues happened. A lot of the students, the behavior issues got really out of control. There was less support from administration. Students lost really important, valuable, emotional and social intelligence time that should have happened in a classroom. So, frankly, they came back to schools kind of emotionally stunted. If in COVID they were in fifth grade, when they came back as seventh graders, they still acted a lot like fifth graders. And so that's why teachers are burnt out now, because the post-COVID, changes just added on to what was already a pretty exhausting job. So I guess to answer your question, I want there to be hope. I want to support teachers. The only thing that we can do individually, I think, is just support our teachers, do what I can to. My daughter comes home and wants me to buy her teacher some whiteboard markers. I'm like, absolutely. The poor teacher can't even go get her own. She's out of whiteboard markers. And my daughter will say, Mom, can we go buy my teacher some markers? Yes, let's do that. Like that's what I can do right now to support the best that I know how.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good reminder. Like, every one of us, I mean, there are things that we need to do at various levels, right? At the country level, the political level, but individually, there are things that we can do, even if it's just saying a kind word to a teacher.
Send some extra school supplies to school. It does help, believe it or not.
Okay. No, thanks for sharing that. So now I just want to go back to pivoting. So right now we've talked about how very, or basically like, teaching is very similar to project management, if not project management. Now, how do you deal with? So let me just rephrase my question. To somebody who is on the inside, maybe a project manager in HR tech, right? And you've positioned your teaching experience. How do you deal with that? What's the word? Is this stigma? Like, okay, yeah, I can see how, academically or, like it makes sense, but you haven't really managed a project. I'm sure like there's that, so how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say it's a mix of a couple things. Number one, not everyone's going to buy that. Like frankly, as I was interviewing, I had people who 100% were like, yeah, that makes total sense. Like, absolutely. And then you would have the biggest struggle a lot of teachers have is that stigma of like, well, you were just a teacher. And so what I tell teachers, transitioning teachers, whether it's project management or anywhere, is that it's really our responsibility to explain and showcase what that value is and explain it, because people don't truly understand the level. Like even this conversation, right? As I explained what a school year looks like, a lot of people just assume we all were students once, right? So we all sort of think, I know what teachers do. Oh yeah, they had a textbook and someone gave them lesson plans. And no, it's just so much more complicated than that. And so it's educating people about what you did and doing that through your resume, right? And so my resume, back to the question about what I did as I transitioned is I really took time to translate the language of planning a lesson into how that looks like to plan, a project, right? And so explaining, like I just explained to you, how planning an 8-week lesson is a project because I had the tasks and the timeline and it's just really making sure it's like you're overemphasizing how each of those things that you did as a teacher really is managing a project. And I can't emphasize that enough, that is the responsibility of the teacher or the applicant of a job to showcase and explain how that works. Do not assume that the person that you're interviewing with or the person on the other side understands the level of what teachers do. Teachers don't even realize, I think, all the things that they do, right, because it's so programmed in them that it's just part of the job, that when I sit down with a teacher and we break down all of the things that they do, it's when that light bulb is like, oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. Oh, people don't do that all the time. And it's like, no, you don't understand. These skills that you have that you take for granted are so valuable in a corporate setting, but they don't know what they don't know, right? And so it's breaking those down, making sure that they articulate those. And then it's showcasing that to the right person. And again, some people are going to see the job title teacher and they're just going to write you off. But right, if you really showcase what you did as a teacher and really show those accomplishments, you can communicate that.
Right. No, I think that's really important. The onus is really on you to explain and show, how it's very similar to project management. And then, some people will still be blinded by the title, but at least you've done your part. And then there are people that maybe you don't even want to work for them, because if you get in, they would always question your credibility.
Exactly. Right? That's what I tell people. Honestly, do you want to work for someone who just sees you as, quote, just a teacher? And I can highlight it. My first role that I had out of teaching, I actually had 2 different job offers and had a few interviews, final interview rounds. And it really highlighted for me when I was interviewing for the role that I ended up getting. And I found myself avoiding answering questions about using the classroom as an example, because I was just a little bit like afraid that would be, that you're just a teacher, right? And at one point, the person I was interviewing with said, it's okay to use your teaching experience as an example for this question. And it felt so freeing. And I felt so supported of like, oh, this person gets it. They understand that my experience translate, and that's who I want to work for. And that's who I ended up choosing to work for, because they understood that my experience really was super valuable. So you get that vibe when you're interviewing, and you can understand like, no, they see your range of experience as a benefit.
Right. And that's also a good point for us that also on the other side of the hiring table, right? Like, just that statement, like, it's okay, you can use, this experience. Like, that just makes people relax, and then they can
Yep.
really, you give them the freedom to really showcase their experience. So then
Yep.
that's a good point.
Mhm.
Okay, so for somebody who's listening to this, and like, by the way, for those of you that are listening, I see that, you people are already dropping comments. If you have questions, please, drop them in the comments. We'll get to them towards the end. If you have questions, if you have comments, please put them down. But I also wanted to mention, this is not just for people that are teachers that are looking to transition to project management, right? So if you're in a different field, I think this also applies to you, right? Because I guarantee you that you've probably led projects, but you don't necessarily know, or you've done things that you just take for granted, and you haven't quite thought about it. So you just sort of need to maybe take a step back, really assess your experience, and see how it translates, and then use PM language to represent it in your resume. Now, Melissa, for when you did it, did you get help in terms of translating the experience? Because that's really one of the most important things. Like, how did you do that?
That's a great question. I did have some help at the beginning. There are some people on LinkedIn, like Logan Langan is a great example of someone who had really great resources. My experience was I felt overconfident. Oh, I can do this. I did my PMP application and I was denied. I did not get accepted the first time. And frankly, I vividly remember I was driving to work to my classroom and I got the notification that my PMP application was denied, and it floored me. I never took days off. I got to work and I felt so sick. I made a sick plan and I left, and I just needed a day to say, am I making like the worst decision of my entire career to like try to do this thing? I had such kind of imposter syndrome of like, who do I think I am? Like, clearly I'm way ahead of myself. Took a few days. I revamped my application. The feedback was that I didn't specifically show like how I led projects. And so I went through, I revamped my resume. I got some advice from a few different people, resubmitted my application, and then it was accepted. And so from that experience, I wrote a PMP ebook, application ebook that I've shared, that is basically sharing my exact application. I had 4 different projects, how I word for word translated my teaching experience for the PMP application. And I loved your point earlier. I did want to highlight that as well. I've worked with a lot of people, not just teachers, who don't realize they have been managing projects. Almost everyone manages a project somehow. And I don't think people always realize. Executive assistants, anytime you've ever planned an event, if you've planned a wedding, you've managed a project, right? Again, anything with a start and end date and some sort of value that happened as a result, like that's a project, right? And so chefs, people who've gotten their PMP that are like non-traditional, right? Like I said, chefs, business owners, a woman who owned a gymnastics studio, right? Because her project was like setting up the studio was a project, because there was like, the prerequisites, and like there was a start and end date, like a launch of something. And so many people manage projects, and a lot more people are eligible for the PMP than they realize. And I'm a big proponent of non-traditional experience being used to get the PMP, because I think a lot of people just see that requirement and are like, well, I've never been a project manager, so I can't qualify. And I'm like, no, you probably have the experience and you don't even know it.
Right. So your PMP ebook, it helps to, so is this specific to teachers that are transitioning, or is this specific to people from non-traditional backgrounds?
Both. So for my PMP application, it's anyone applying for the PMP that wants help with how to apply, what the process looks like, what happens if you get audited, because I was audited twice as part of my application. So it kind of just answers all those questions of like, what do I do? How do I do it? What does the application look like? How detailed do I need to be? How many words are required for the application? And then for my PMP application, it was a mix of teaching experience, and also one of the years was a nonprofit working in Guatemala. So I kind of have examples. It's not just a teaching experience that I used. I was able to use both. So I had 4 projects that I used. And so again, word for word, for me as a visual learner, back to your question of like, I couldn't find examples. When I was applying, I was like, how do I fill this application out? And there weren't that many examples. And so I kind of created this resource to give people visual examples of like, sometimes you literally need to see like, how did she word it? How did she translate teaching into a project? And so it's just a resource for people, anyone who wants to figure out how to translate their experience into the experience required for the PMP.
Yeah, no, amazing. And yeah, even if you're not in the teaching space, like just seeing how somebody else did that would really, give you ideas. Okay, so Melissa, let's talk about, so now you've pivoted into project management, and you said you're working in a HR tech company at first, and you've gone on to work in other industries. So how did you do that? How did you move from, as a project manager, from one industry to another?
I mean, it goes back to what I said before about pivoting from teaching into project management. It's on me as the applicant to highlight how my skills transferred. And so if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Range by David Epstein, but that book was like just super impactful. And I actually used it in my interview with the job I have now to really explain why project managers don't need to be the subject matter experts. Sometimes having some industry knowledge is helpful. And believe me, in 6 months in my new job, I've learned so much about product development and supply chain and all these things. But at the end of the day, the reason I got hired was not for that industry knowledge. It was for my ability to manage a project, create process, create efficiency, manage and organize people, projects, a portfolio of projects, how to find loopholes or places in the process that need to be improved. I did that in my first role in the HR tech company, and I showcased that and how I did those things, having no HR tech experience either, right? So it wasn't about the industry knowledge. It was about the skills I brought to managing the projects. And then I just highlighted that. And I honestly, I really emphasize that having this range of experience from teaching to nonprofit to different industries is actually a benefit to the company because, and again, this is just like we said before, not everyone's going to hear that, but the right people will hear that. When you have someone kind of newer and fresher looking at something and they ask the question of like, why do we do things this way? Or why is this like this? And the answer is like, well, this is how it's always been, right? Having fresh eyes really can help a company and like energize it. And so I really kind of marketed myself that way, is like, I will come in with fresh eyes, experience creating process and experience creating workflows that make sense and will help make this a better process, right? And so that's really how I sold myself to, different, I was interviewing in a range from like software tech to like the freeze-dried fruit to all kinds of industries. And I was getting interviews and multiple interviews at different levels. So it was about, the feedback I take from that is it was about how I was marketing my skills and my value and less about the industry knowledge.
Okay. And when you're marketing yourself, like, are you talking about doing this in the interview? Like that's where really you're marketing yourself and positioning yourself?
Yes, but obviously you can't even get to the interview unless your resume markets that as well. So I'm a big fan of a project management highlights section. And so for me, like, I have a free template that I've used that I've tweaked over the years, but like, I'm a big fan of a pretty short intro, couple lines on years of experience, industry, whatever. And then you just dive right into your values. So project management highlights, 3 or 4 highlights. And what I love about that is it's a way to showcase, especially for transitioning careers, whether it's teachers or industries, anyone pivoting careers should be using a highlight section, because what you get to do there is share 3 or 4 bullet points where you get to summarize, the parts of your career that maybe don't quite fall under project management, but that qualify as that. So I had a couple of highlights where I could really summarize, here are the things that I've done that's very clearly project management. And then from there, really highlight the technical skills, my PMP, the upskilling that I've done. And then from there, I dive into the experience and the responsibility, not the responsibilities, the accomplishments and the things that I've done. And so, as someone is skimming my resume to even see if they want to interview me, they're automatically seeing my experience, my skills, my project management highlights. I've already done the work for them by translating those things into that PM language. And so I will get an interview because they'll say, I want to talk to her more. And then during the interview is where I really sell, let me break this down even more and show you how I can solve your issues that you're having, how I can lead your teams, how I can, do all that. So.
And in that resume, your experience section, so is that like at the bottom of what you just mentioned? Because you mentioned the PM highlight section, the technical skills, upskilling, accomplishment. So where does the experience fall? Like
right after that. So again, I'm making it sound like it's pretty long, but really it's like very quick intro, three bullet points, a few lines for the technical skills. So PMP, anything else, and then experience starts right there. So it's, again, I have an example on my top mate. It's for anyone who wants to look at it. I actually have a template. I also have the actual resume that I used when I left teaching that got me the job, my first job. So if people want to see, like, it's word for word what I used and how I did it and how I got interviews that way. So it's there.
All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short.
Nope. So yeah, so it is there. It's for me, again, I would maybe recommend it differently for someone who isn't transitioning careers completely, but for that career transition, the biggest hesitation I think that a lot of recruiters or hiring managers have is, can they really do the job? And so I really think the highlight section and that technical skills part at the top starts to convince them, okay, this person has what I need. Now let me see what they've done. And so that to me is why that helps.
Okay. Well, that's, yeah. And they also, a lot of people also sort of skim resumes, and they're looking at, hundreds of, thousands of resumes sometimes. So you want to make sure that, you give them the most important information at the top of your resume, right?
Exactly. So, and specifically, I saw a question in the comments. I'm specifically highlighting the results. It's a combination of the project description, but really the result and what I did. It's the problem action result in every bullet point. Like, I'm showing exactly what what was the problem and what did I do to resolve that and what was the result. So it's kind of all of that in a bullet point.
All right. Okay. So I think, we've gotten to a point where we can go to audience questions. So please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. While you're doing that, just a couple of announcements. So if you need help with landing 100 to a 300K PM role, just feel free to reach out. You should see a link either somewhere around this video or in our bio. If we're not a fit, we will send you free resources to help you with that. Another thing that I should mention is that we are launching the PM therapy. We're launching PM therapy on Substack, and we're going live on September 1st. So this is going to be like a resource hub and a safe space for PMs to get together, and we're going to share lots of good resources. So yeah, do check that out. It's free to subscribe. So now let's go to the comments. Let's go through the comments. So I'm gonna start from the top. LinkedIn user. I don't know who LinkedIn user is. That's a really big thing. I had both cultures, and my supervisor was 100% the model for expectations. Yeah, this was at the beginning. I don't remember what we're talking about. Yeah, there. But yeah, I don't think that's not a question. It's just, I guess the person chiming in. All right. So from Boomer, totally agree with Melissa. Teaching and project management are not two separate units, and they basically apply the same principles for the successful outcomes. Yeah, right. I didn't realize how similar. And just, to one thing that really stuck with me, Melissa, is what you mentioned. A lot of us went through school, right? So we think that we know, what the job is like, but we were just a stakeholder in that entire piece of the puzzle, right? So, and the teacher was the PM basically in that in that, what you call it, experience, so to speak, right? So there are all other facets that we're not privy to. So I didn't realize that until today.
And like I said before, but it's also on the teacher to really communicate that, because people don't know what happens behind the scenes. People don't understand all the things that teachers have to do. And so it's important to make sure teachers can actually spell that out and explain what it is that they do.
And this is from Ashley Long. Teachers have a lot of responsibility, and there's overlap with what they do in a lot of industries. The issue is that the profession is not respected. Yeah. As a teacher, I've learned more than in any other setting. There is never a shortage of challenges, and there are often little resources. As a teacher, you have to problem solve constantly. Yeah, no, I mean, Melissa, anything you want to say here?
No, it is true. One of the things that I think about a lot that's very transferable is the context switching that happens throughout the day. I might have, yesterday I had 7 30-minute back-to-backs, and it was like going from this meeting to this meeting to this meeting. And you speaking of burnout, that is where I think some of that burnout can come from teachers or from project management. But having kind of sharpened those skills, going from teaching, 44 minutes of Spanish language arts, and then 44 minutes of teaching 8th graders, and then 44 minutes of this, right? Like, you really learn to context switch, and that skill really translates over. So lots of problems.
Teachers make good PMs, and they're more resilient.
And you have to be so resourceful as a PM, right? Like, often being creative to what that person was saying about problem solving. And teachers are constantly having to solve problems in the moment. And when you have an audience of 30 live, you don't have time to sit there and stew over it. You've got to make those decisions right then, even if it's just I'm going to pretend that I know exactly what's going on. You got to pivot live, because you got students staring at you, waiting for you to make a decision. Oh, the technology's not working, and the overhead projector isn't working. What are you going to do right then? You don't have time to think about it. And so that skill of problem solving and thinking on your feet is something that teachers just do so naturally. They don't realize that that's a skill that they developed over time. Right.
And, I'm just going back to my time back in school. And, as kids, we were savage, man. You're not gonna, there's no being diplomatic, you're not going to give teacher the benefit of the doubt, right? So the teacher could be floundering, and, the students are going to let the teacher.
I taught middle school. They have no mercy, right? You got to be real on it, or you're out of luck. So anyway.
Oh my God, poor teachers. Oh, man. All right. So let's, all right. Also from Ashley Long, I think this is, this is LinkedIn user to Ashley Long.
The question before that, where can you find resources? If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, definitely connect with me. I have links. I have a TopMate account that has all of my PMP ebook, my free template. I have a few other resources. I do offer some coaching and helping people with the PMP application as well. I have I mentioned earlier the Google course. I worked with a company called Better Career and created our own 35-hour course that actually helps provide people with the 35 hours. So I have a lot of resources on either my TopMate or my LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out and connect, and I can set you up there.
All right, a joke question for the coach. Do you have the same creative mindset like Melissa? I believe I hear Melissa reframing her experience in the position. To Melissa, how did HR tech prepare you for a PM role?
Well, I can answer my part of that question. So the HR tech role was a project manager role. It was a company where we did technology and consulting. So I was hired from the classroom into this role where I was the first and only project manager at first at the company. And so I was kind of creating what project management looked like. And again, that was a really kind of exciting thing for me to get to determine and define what is project management. But it was also very challenging because there weren't any resources. There weren't Gantt charts and project management tools created. So I created templates for how to manage the projects that we ran. And so it was a lot of digging from the ground up and just really grassroots, figuring stuff out. And again, teachers had, if anyone taught during COVID, you had to learn 20 different technologies overnight, how to use Zoom, how to use all the special tools. And so it's similar, where I just had to figure it out. And I learned how to make a Gantt chart from scratch, and I did all these things. And so that was a lot of that role, was just learning what worked for me, how to find those things. And so that really prepared me for the role I'm in now, where again, I'm one of the first project managers of the company, and I got to kind of showcase how I did that here. And now I get to do this for this company.
Nice. And there you go. So who has a better creative mindset? So I think you have the answer to that. All right. So those are all the questions that we have. Melissa, any last minute thing you want to share before we wrap up?
I just thanks for the time here. And, because I've been in my new role for the last 6 months or so, I've been a little bit less active than I used to be on LinkedIn, but very much still checking my messages and observing what's going on. And so please feel free to reach out. Happy to answer questions. I do have a lot of resources in my featured content, like probably the number one question I get is like, what advice do you have for me? I'm trying to leave the classroom, or what advice do you have for me? I want to pivot into project management. And I have several posts where I talk about advice, who to connect with. I have lists of all the amazing project managers on LinkedIn that are super supportive. So lots of free resources out there if you're just getting started and want to figure out what to do next.
Right. No, amazing. And just to add to that, so one thing I really like about LinkedIn is like the PM community is really supportive. So there's so many PMs that are just producing good content for free. So yeah, please feel free to check out Melissa's post where she talks about all the PMs to follow. All right. So having said that, Melissa, thank you so much for coming and for sharing. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you really enriched my knowledge, and I think the audience's knowledge. So thank you so much for sharing, for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you, y'all. All right. Take care.
Thank you.